A proud, wealthy man ruins a struggling cab driver's only source of income, unaware that she has a child depending on her. She's furious, and he doesn't care. But then, life takes an unexpected turn. They are forced to live together. What will be their history? Will the hatred remain forever? What would you do if someone destroyed your only source of income? Well, let's dive into this beautiful story and find out what happens. Grab your popcorn and tighten your seatbelt as we embark on this journey together. The story kicks off with Martins in his room, preparing to go to work. He calls his driver, but the driver gives him an excuse, saying he isn't feeling well and won't be able to drive him that day. At this point, Martins is already running late for an important board meeting. Frustrated, he angrily insults his driver and even extends the insult to his driver's family before rudely ending the call. Wow, that was harsh. No one should insult an employee's family over a small issue. With no other choice, Martins books a ride. After a while, a female driver arrives. Martins is surprised and furious that they sent a woman. He immediately calls the company, shouting at them for assigning him a female driver. He insults her as well, but when the company informs him that no other drivers are available, he has no choice but to go with her. As they drive, the lady almost hits another car and panics, while Martins harshly criticizes her driving skills. Later, they stop to buy water, but when she buys one for him, he refuses it, insulting her for not knowing the right brand to purchase. They continue the journey without him drinking the water. Tensions rise again as he keeps insulting her for every little mistake. Frustrated, she finally loses her temper, shouts back at him, and steps out of the car, handing him the keys so he can drive himself. Furious, Martins calls the company and demands that she be fired, threatening to file a lawsuit if he ever sees her working for them again. After ending the call, he remains silent as she reluctantly gets back into the car to complete the ride. After reaching his destination and handling his business, they start heading back home. On their way, they encounter a narrow road, and the driver suggests turning back, but Martins insists she drives through, shouting at her. Suddenly, a group of men emerges, attempting to attack them. Martins, terrified, shouts, "Nothing should happen to me, oh!" in a sarcastic tone. The young lady does her best to escape, and thankfully they make it out safely. However, when they arrive at his house, Martins doesn't even thank her. He just walks past her. Inside his house, Martins panics, saying he's too young to die. But guess what? He doesn't even realize that she was the one who saved him. No appreciation at all. That's bad. Meanwhile, this young lady, Clara, has a beautiful daughter. When she arrives home, her daughter welcomes her, and Clara asks if she has eaten. The little girl replies that she hasn't. Clara then tells her she should have collected food from the food seller in their neighborhood and that she would pay later. But the daughter explains that she tried, but the woman refused to give her food because they were already in debt. Clara, heartbroken, promises to get her something to eat. That night, Martins tells his friend about the incident with the lady, still insulting her. However, he also admits that she saved his life. His friend laughs and teases him, saying, "So the almighty Martins was saved by a girl?" The next morning, Clara is at home, dressing her daughter for school, when the child complains about her unpaid school fees. Clara promises to settle it once she receives her salary. Unfortunately, just then, she gets a call from her boss, who informs her that she has been fired. Shocked, she asks why, and her boss explains that the last customer she picked up, Martins, filed a complaint against her and even threatened to shut down the company if they didn't take action. Clara is devastated, but tries to hide her emotions as her daughter watches her closely, asking what's wrong. She reassures her that everything is fine. That morning, Clara storms to Martin's house, yelling and insulting him for making her lose her job. She curses him, saying, "For every day my daughter goes hungry, you will never know peace." Then she walks away while he just stares at her, saying nothing. Later, Martins tells his friend what happened, and his friend is furious with him. He scolds Martins for his actions and suggests he get her job back, but Martins remains unremorseful. That night, Martins has a nightmare in which he is being attacked, and Clara is there, but refuses to help him. Just as a gunshot is fired at him, he wakes up in fear. Panicked, he immediately calls his friend to tell him about the dream, but his friend doesn't take him seriously, and they end the call. That same night, Martins called Clara's company, asking them to give her job back. However, they told him they couldn't because they had already hired someone else, and there was no longer a position for her. Frustrated, he angrily shouted at them, insulting and blaming them for everything before ending the call. Guys, can you believe this? He didn't even blame himself for what happened. Now, his pride has cost someone their job. What a world. After some time, Martins called the company again, requesting Clara's house address and phone number. They promised to send it to him. The next morning, Martins invited his friend over and told him everything that had happened. His friend advised him to visit Clara and try to make amends. However, Martins, being full of himself, refused, saying he couldn't do that. But his friend insisted, warning him that the curse Clara placed on him might follow him forever if he didn't make things right. Reluctantly, Martins headed to Clara's house the next morning. As his driver took him through the neighborhood, he was irritated and disgusted. "Is this where humans live?" he scoffed, questioning if they were in the right place. His driver assured him that they were following the correct address. When they arrived at Clara's compound, Martins sent his driver to call her. The driver entered Clara's small room and found her with her daughter. He informed her that Martins wanted to see her. At first, Clara didn't even remember who Martins was. After the driver explained, she finally understood and said she wouldn't go outside to meet him. Instead, if Martins truly wanted to see her, he should come inside. The driver returned to Martins and relayed the message. Martins was furious. "Is she mad? How can she expect me to enter that smelly house?" he snapped. Without a second thought, he ordered his driver back into the car, and they drove off. On the way back, he called his friend and ranted about how disgusting Clara's house was. His friend, clearly disappointed, told him he should have just gone inside and spoken to her. After some thought, Martins turned the car around and went back to Clara's house. However, the moment he stepped inside and saw the state of her home, he almost threw up. Unable to handle it, he ran outside. His driver, shocked, asked what was wrong, but Martins just shouted at him to start the car and drive away as fast as possible. Later that day, Martins' friend visited him, and they sat down to discuss the situation. His friend was displeased with his actions and advised him to stop treating people poorly. "You wouldn't like to be treated this way," he warned, trying to make Martins see life from a different perspective. The next day, Clara was at home when her friend visited and brought some foodstuffs. Clara was very grateful. As they talked, her friend, still upset that Martins had come around, angrily suggested that Clara should have done something unforgettable to him. She used broken English, but Clara quickly corrected her, reminding her not to speak improper English in front of her daughter. Lisa, Clara's daughter, then asked her mother to prepare the food her friend had brought. Clara assured her that she would cook soon and handed her the bag to take to the kitchen. She then pulled her friend aside and warned her again not to speak bad English around Lisa. A while later, Clara stepped out, and Martins came to her house but couldn't find her. However, he saw Lisa lying unconscious on the sofa. Alarmed, he quickly carried her and rushed her to the hospital. When Clara returned home and couldn't find her daughter, she panicked. She ran outside and asked a neighbor if he had seen Lisa. The man explained that a guy had rushed out with Lisa to the hospital because she had lost consciousness. Upon hearing this, Clara became even more frantic and demanded to know which hospital, but the neighbor didn't have that information. Desperate, she grabbed the man's arm, insisting he follow her to look for her daughter. Not knowing what else to do, Clara ran to Martin's house and knocked frantically on the gate. The gateman answered and told her that Martins wasn't around. Clara, now furious, yelled at the gateman to call his boss immediately. The gateman, seeing how desperate she was, did as she requested. When Martins answered the call, Clara snatched the phone from the gateman. "Where is my daughter?" she shouted. Martins, remaining calm, told her to calm down and explained how he had found Lisa unconscious and taken her to the hospital. He then gave her the hospital's address. Without wasting a second, Clara rushed to the hospital. Upon arrival, she saw Martins sitting there and immediately shouted, "Where is my daughter?" Martins reassured her and directed her to Lisa's room. Just then, the doctor came out, and Clara anxiously asked if Lisa was okay. The doctor nodded. "She's fine," she assured her. Then she asked Clara, "Has Lisa eaten today?" At that moment, Clara froze. The simple question made her heart sink. She hesitated before finally admitting, "No, she hasn't." The doctor frowned. "She needs to eat immediately," she instructed. Martins immediately offered to go and buy food, but Clara, still holding on to her pride, refused, saying he shouldn't bother. Amused, Martins jokingly asked, "Do you even have money to buy food for her?" Clara remained silent. Seeing her reaction, Martins simply turned and left to get the food. After some time, he returned, but Clara was irritated that it had taken so long. They argued briefly before Martins finally handed the food to Lisa. Lisa then asked her mom how they were going to pay the hospital bills. Clara felt bad at that moment, and Martins teased her, asking if she could afford it. She remained silent. Martins then suggested that Lisa come to his house for some time so she could recover properly. Clara refused the offer, arguing with him as usual, but Lisa pleaded with her mother, and eventually, Clara had no choice but to agree. When they arrived at Martin's house, he ordered food for them. Clara then asked, "Why don't you have a cook?" Martins replied, "I'm very careful about what goes into my stomach." Clara scoffed, "You're just scared of people hurting you, but you have no problem hurting others." Martins stared at her for a moment, then continued eating without responding. Later that day, Clara's friend visited. As Clara was escorting her out, she pleaded with her to help her find a job so she could take care of Lisa. Her friend assured her that she would try. That evening, Martins was in Lisa's room and casually asked her about her father. Lisa hesitated before admitting that she didn't know him. Martins, confused, asked if Clara had ever told her who he was. Lisa then opened up and revealed that Clara was not her biological mother. Clara had found her on the street and taken her in. Since then, Lisa had been calling her mom. Martins was stunned. Still processing this revelation, Martins went downstairs and saw Clara on the phone, searching for a job. After she ended the call, he asked about her educational qualifications. Clara immediately got angry and spoke to him rudely. "You got me fired from my last job, and now you want to help me? Who knows what damage you'll do next?" She walked away, leaving Martins in silence. That same day, Martins' friend came over, and he told him everything he had learned about Clara. His friend was surprised. "She has a good heart," he said. Later that night, Martins saw Clara watching TV in the living room. He went to sit with her, but she was uncomfortable and wanted to leave. He gently held her back. Then he asked, "How did you do it?" Clara, confused, replied, "Do what?" Martins then told her that he had spoken to Lisa and learned that she wasn't her biological mother. He admitted that he was amazed by her kindness. However, Clara was furious that he had asked Lisa such a personal question behind her back. She lashed out at him, accusing him of being a terrible person. In response, Martins shared his own story. He explained that he wasn't born into wealth. His father had adopted him and another boy. However, the other boy later poisoned their father in an attempt to take over all his properties. Fortunately, there were CCTV cameras that caught him, and he was arrested. On his deathbed, Martin's father told him, "It's better to be alone in your world than to be surrounded by people who could betray you." Ever since then, Martins had struggled with trust issues. Clara felt pity for him. She gently told him, "Everyone has a purpose in this world. Isolating yourself won't help. Instead, you should change the way people see you. Don't let your past ruin your future." For the first time, Martins actually listened to her advice. The next morning, Martin's driver arrived for work and greeted him. To everyone's surprise, Martins greeted him back and even asked about his family. The driver was shocked. Martins had never asked about his family before. Meanwhile, in Lisa's room, she pleaded with her mom to let them stay in Martin's house. But Clara was firm. She assured Lisa that once she got a job, they would leave and she would take care of her. Lisa reluctantly agreed. Later that day, Clara came downstairs and saw Martin sitting on the couch. He called her over and handed her a document. It was an employment letter. Clara was shocked. "I got you a job," Martins told her. "You can start as soon as possible." Clara was overwhelmed with joy. She fell to her knees, thanking him repeatedly. Then she ran upstairs to share the good news with Lisa. They hugged each other tightly, overjoyed. Wow, Clara is really changing Martins, isn't she? What do you guys think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The next morning, Clara's friend visited. When Clara told her everything, her friend smiled and said, "Sometimes your worst enemy might turn out to be your biggest helper." She was genuinely happy for Clara. Later that night, Martins lay in bed, unable to sleep. His mind was filled with thoughts of Clara. "Guys, I think Martins is falling in love with her. Or maybe he already has." On the other hand, Clara was also restless. She looked worried, but what was on her mind? Well, let's find out. The next morning, Clara and Lisa packed their bags. As they were leaving, Martin stood there, watching them, clearly unhappy. But he didn't say anything. Clara and Lisa returned home, and as soon as they arrived, Clara's eyes filled with tears. Lisa, noticing, asked, "Mom, why are you crying? Do you like Martins?" She could have just stayed back, making Clara surprised as she left. Later that day, Martins confided in his friend about his feelings for Clara, admitting that he had fallen in love with her. His friend was overjoyed, seeing that Martins was experiencing love for the first time. He advised him to go after her and express his feelings. Encouraged, Martins left immediately. When he arrived at Clara's house, she was shocked to see him. Without hesitation, Martins confessed his feelings, telling her, "I really want you and Lisa in my life. I love you so much." Clara was thrilled by his words. Smiling, she responded, "I love you too." Martins was surprised. He hadn't expected her to feel the same way. Overcome with emotion, she kissed him, and he felt pure happiness. At that moment, Lisa came out and playfully said, "While you guys are busy doing that, let me go get my bag." She smiled and walked away, leaving Martins and Clara embracing each other passionately. And that's how the story ends, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Always remember, sometimes your worst enemy might be the one who lifts you up. Thanks for watching this fascinating story in my world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting stories like this. See you in our next story.